Hi everyone, thank you for your patience. Thank you for coming down this rainy evening to BASH. I'm Zing from SGInnovate, and we are very happy to have an esteemed panel to bring you information about data we trust. At SGInnovate, we believe Singapore has the ability and capabilities to tackle hard problems from around the world. And part of our efforts includes knowledge sharing sessions like the one you're here for today. Ocean Protocol has been a long-time partner of SGInnovate, and we do have a series of data dialogue coming up. So do check it out on our website, sginnovate.com. Without further ado, I'll hand over the mic to Niels, who will introduce himself at the panel. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming first. I'm Arno, and I'll be the moderator of this session tonight, so very pleased to be here. So I think we have a very exciting topic tonight. When I was invited to join, I was actually quite amused because I think we've tried to push all the buzzword of the moment, like blockchain, big data, AI in like one event. So I think that'd be very interesting to get more clarity on all of that tonight, and that's what we will try to cover. So let's start immediately, and I would like to start with the panelists first, like if you can introduce yourself very quickly, like 3, 4, 5 minutes. We don't have much time for that. And then I'll start asking some questions. Who would like to start? Andreas, you're next to me.
I'm Andreas. I'm at PwC. If you hear PwC, you may think, oh, that's an audit firm. So what am I doing here? Well, as it turns out, PwC also does a lot of work in technology, data analytics, blockchain, risk management of emerging technologies, and that's what I'm part of.
Hello everyone, I'm Stefan from AI Singapore, and we are essentially a national program to support the AI community in Singapore through various funding programs, talent development programs, training programs, and also tools and platforms that we build that are hopefully useful to the community.
Hi everyone, I'm Mike Anderson. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at DEX and founder of the Ocean Protocol. So we're talking a little bit about data, AI, and blockchain. I was just going to say a little bit about what motivated me to get involved in this space. So I've always been about business problems, how you solve business problems using technology. And AI is one of the greatest opportunities of our time to make a difference in business, in our societies, in the world that we live in. And I worked for a long time in machine learning, neural networks, evolutionary algorithms, actually solving problems with AI. But one of the challenges to actually make it work, of course, was data, and particularly getting data of the kind of quality and the kind of volume that you need to make AI work was a major stumbling block, especially for like innovative startups that typically have some smart people and some great algorithms, but not much data to work with. And in particular, one of the problems was that data is distributed everywhere, and it's sitting in these silos all around the world, in different organizations, in governments. Often each individual organization has its own little silos in different countries or between different departments. And we saw that one of the most important enablers to getting the value of AI was to be able to unlock these silos, to make data exchange possible, to make data preparation possible, or the data cleaning that needs to happen. What we really need to do is set up data supply lines that bring data together to solve AI problems. And to me, that's the heart of what Ocean Protocol is all about, so the organization that we work for. And it's about being able to enable these data supply lines, this flow of data to solve real-world problems with AI. And then why blockchain? Well, blockchain actually makes it possible to do this on a decentralized basis. So instead of having, a Google or an Amazon trying to suck up all of the data in the world to make this happen, it's possible for individuals, for small organizations, for ecosystems to achieve this objective of making this data flow happen. And of course, the blockchain gives us a currency so that we're able to financially and economically reward people who add value in this data ecosystem. So Ocean really is about bringing together these sort of this data and blockchain in order to serve the purposes of AI and ultimately to create value. So a little bit of background, and that's what got me excited about this project and why I'm here.
Great, thanks a lot for that introduction. So before we start diving into some more specific topics, I'd like to clarify a few points. So maybe we can start with you, Stephen. And if you can actually help us to understand what AI is, because we keep hearing it everywhere. Every time we talk with someone different, we get a different definition. So if you can kind of give us your definition of what AI is and what we're looking at in the near future.
Right, it's true. AI is a lot of things to a lot of people, and I'll just give you my personal interpretation of the term. I think it's an area of computer science, really, that started some decades ago, and in its broadest sense, it actually encompasses a lot of different types of computer science, different types of algorithms, different types of problem sets. From sensing, perception, to understanding, to language, interpretation, sense making, all the way to reasoning, decision making, planning, and so on. Right? You can even lump in action or interaction, or perhaps even the emotional aspect of intelligence into that set of things. All right. Now, that's a very broad term, right, and a very broad field. And I think what we're seeing in practice is that today's AI methods, today's AI algorithms or solutions are a lot more constrained or focus on certain subsets of this domain, right? So we see a lot of progress in machine learning, for example, very powerful algorithms. We see a lot of progress in prediction or classification, right, where these algorithms work very well. But other areas still remain unexplored, I think. And so the AI still has a lot of potential to me, but at the moment it also has a lot of hype. So we have to be careful. Not everything that calls itself AI is AI these days. And there are a lot of things that could call themselves AI, but are not yet in that whole set or in that understanding.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And while we're in the definitions, maybe Mike, if you can define what actually blockchain is, because I know when we talk about blockchain, everybody thinks about Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, but it's a lot more than that. And I think it'd be great if you can give your view on what blockchain is and help us to better understand it.
Yeah, it's a great question actually, and I think I'll try and answer it at two levels. There's the techie level, and then there's the what does it actually mean level. So on the technical level, a blockchain is pretty much what it says in the tin. It is a data structure, an information structure, which is made out of blocks, and there is some way of connecting those blocks together into a chain, and typically that's done with cryptographic techniques so that it becomes impossible to break the integrity of the chain. It's impossible or infeasible to forge a chain or to create a fake chain. And what that allows, of course, is the implementation of many different things, but most importantly, systems that depend on decentralized consensus can agree on the state of the chain, which enables you to do things like cryptocurrency. Bitcoin obviously being an important example, but there's many other different blockchain systems. But to me, that's just at the technical level, what actually, the mechanics of how it works. What I think is interesting about blockchain, or some people would say decentralized technology more generally, is that it completely changes the economic model for how business gets done in the world and how organization will occur. By which I mean that suddenly it has become possible to build entire economic systems, entire organizations that are running virtually, running in code, and don't have any centralized authority making all the decisions in that context. So you don't need a bank anymore. You can do your financial transactions on a decentralized system. Yeah, and that really is what's exciting about blockchain. It is the decentralized technology potential that it opens up, not so much the actual fact that it is a chain of blocks. So I hope that answers the question.
Great. Thanks for that. Andreas, now I have a question for you, because at PwC you work with many organizations, and you can see like where they are in terms of maturity. So where are we in terms of maturity with regard of blockchain or AI for most of the organization? And what appetite do you see? Because I know there are many startups working around these domains, but like, is there like actually concrete applications for large organizations, for example?
I think we have to distinguish between AI and blockchain for this question, because for AI, many companies are already quite far ahead. Some of them are specializing and have built themselves, have developed new business models around AI and big data. In blockchain, I would say that we have not yet come beyond the point of POCs, proof of concept, and test areas. I think what's still lacking is a large-scale adoption of blockchain within a corporation or within an ecosystem of companies. But I think it's only a matter of time until this is going to happen, because the technology as such has great potential. I think based on our review and based on some of the our own publications, what holds companies back in adopting blockchain at a larger scale is a lack of trust. And I think that ties in quite well with the topic of today's session, which is around trust. And I think one of the questions that we give a lot of thought to is, as advisors to companies, how can we provide trust? How can we provide them with a sense of assurance around using blockchain and even using AI? I mean, every one of you in the audience may be aware of the issues around explainability of AI, lack of transparency. AI is a black box. I mean, that's a concern to many companies who are thinking about rolling out AI technologies. And in fact, the Singaporean regulators, the MAS, and also the PDPC recently came out with their own guidelines on how to deal with AI and how to build responsible and explainable and accountable, transparent AI. So I think it's going in the right direction, but we're probably still a few years away from mass adoption of these technologies.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Stephen, question for you, because we mentioned AI and the idea of like a large volume of data is required to make your AI more powerful. If you can give us a bit more explanation on why large quantity of data is important to build strong and efficient AI.
I think it's just because of the way the algorithms are designed and the way they work. So, deep learning algorithms, deep learning approaches all rely on large amounts of data. And so unless you have that data available, it's very hard to get these algorithms off the ground and get them to performance levels that make sense in practice, right? So we work with a lot of industry partners, and when they come to us, the first question is always, do you have the data, right? So that's the starting point. Once we have a data set, we have something to work with, and we can look at applying different approaches, different training methods, different testing methods and evaluations to that data set, right? So this is really the starting point to work on that. But I would also say this is the constrained case, right? So you look at one particular company, one particular data set. Where it gets more interesting, as Mike already mentioned, is can we make a larger amount of data available to a larger number of people and users, right? So I think this aspect of data sharing is going to become more and more important in the future, because it's the only way that we can get these algorithms to improve and give us better results. So I'm quite excited about some of the technologies, like what Ocean Protocol implements, that enable some of these data sharing capabilities with all the enabling this with all the restrictions of privacy and access to data and ownership of data still in place. So maybe another example for this is the healthcare domain, right? We've been working quite a bit in the healthcare space, and we launched a grand challenge in healthcare. And the question for us to go into this space was also, first question, is the data there, right? And yes, there is data there. But again, it's still mostly in silos, and healthcare in particular, particularly so because of the sensitivity of the data, right? And there's been some high-profile data leaks in Singapore as well and around the world. And so how can we still make use of all the data that has been collected around the world in healthcare, for example, where a lot of different clinics, different doctors work on very similar diseases, similar problems, and make this data available and accessible to researchers who can come up with better solutions that ultimately will benefit everyone, right?
Great, thank you. I think I have a question that is in between Mike and Andrea, so I'll let you decide who wants to answer. Because today we see a lot of companies have a lot of data, and I've seen that they already struggle to do something with their own data, like just technically like preparation, cleaning of the data, access of the data, and so on and so forth. So what are the limitations today of like accessing your own data for your own usage, and how are they going to transition to a world where they don't only work with their own data, but they also work with data from the rest of the world, and how do they integrate within that ecosystem? So I don't know who want to take that question.
So I'll give an angle which I think is potentially interesting on this, and it's all about unlocking. As you say, there's a huge amount of data already. We actually are not short of data, we're short of the ability to share it and join it up and clean it, particularly. And some people are good at cleaning data, but most people aren't. It's actually a really highly skilled job. But I think the fundamental thing which is a blocker in this space is everyone is trying to do this in their own different way, and all it's doing is creating more silos. There's lots of like little bespoke data cleaning projects, bespoke data sharing arrangements. There isn't a protocol yet to do that. And by protocol I mean, think about email. Yeah, if you send an email, doesn't matter what email client you're using or the person receiving it is using or what email server or who's running that email server. It could be Google, it could be your company. The protocol means it just works. You're fairly sure they'll get the email and what they read is pretty much what you sent. Yeah, there's no equivalent for that in data sharing right now. It doesn't exist. Yeah, you have to figure out your own way of doing it, and there are in fact many different ways of doing it, but they all have their pros and cons, and none is really designed for the kind of future global data sharing economy. So that sort of toolkit is one of the things we're trying to create, in fact, at Ocean, is just to make it really, really easy to unlock that data, and when you want to share it with someone, make it very easy for them to be able to consume it. And I think this is critically important. And once you have a protocol like that, then people can obviously innovate around that, build different kinds of tools, build different kinds of clients, etc., etc. But I think that's very central to what we see as one of the enablers for this space.
Andreas, anything you'd like to add? Or?
I agree with this view. Maybe one thing to add is that when we go to companies and look at their data, we have quite a big team that does something called data governance and data management, which can be seen to some extent as the precursor to what Mike just talked about. Because I think before you can even think about data sharing or think about installing a horizontal layer of a protocol, you need to kind of know where your data is and have a sense of the lineage and provenance and your data architecture. So all of that needs to be done. But I think the good thing is that it can be done together in one data strategy. So you don't need to do the cleanup first and then think about data sharing. You can really think about data as a strategic asset and then explore different technologies on how to first internally unlock it and streamline it, and then in a second step try to share it by building these data ecosystems and data supply lines within an industry with other companies. So I think it's one process around data management, data strategy.
Thank you. Stefan, question for you this time. So we mentioned like if we're able to start sharing a lot of data, it's going to make it a lot easier for like strong AI. And where do you see it getting the most traction in the next few years? Like which industry specifically is really has a strong appetite for it, but is not being able to do it at this stage?
Well, as I mentioned, I think healthcare is one. We see a lot of interest from researchers around the world who want to collaborate with partners, teams here in Singapore, and vice versa. And there's just barriers because the data cannot leave the premises, right? It cannot be shared essentially, unless under very strict conditions and limitations. So I would say in terms of the potential, the willingness, the benefit, healthcare would be on top of my list. Another one where we see a lot of requests is actually finance. I think it's a similar situation where there's a lot of data, with different companies in different silos, but of course companies also see the value in the data and are not willing to share it without the proper protections in place, right? Without the certainty that this data is not compromised and also doesn't benefit their competitors, right? So again, this is an area where I think such new approaches to data sharing, making data more accessible to more users, could really benefit the industry.
And so you mentioned a bit about regulations, and maybe for Andreas this question, because Singapore is quite progressive in terms of regulations around AI and data sharing and blockchains. So maybe if you could give us an idea of what's happening in Singapore and how it's different from the rest of the world, and give us a view of what's happening around the world, and how different, for example, healthcare companies based in different countries are going to work together. Are they submitted to different type of regulations, or how does it work?
Actually, the regulation that has come out here in Singapore and also in other jurisdictions like Switzerland was very much around ICOs, so crypto assets, crypto exchanges. And I think that's good, but if we talk about corporate adoption of blockchain at some point, then more regulation has to come, has to be initiated, and has to be implemented. And I'm thinking specifically about smart contracts. There is no legal framework yet, really, anywhere around smart contracts or about tokenized assets. I think that has to come at some point. Singapore is definitely at the forefront of all of this, but I wouldn't really say that there is already an accepted regulatory framework around data sharing. So what a company has to do, or what companies have to do before they enter into data sharing, is very much governed by existing laws around privacy, intellectual property, that have to be respected. Maybe at some point there will be an overarching regulatory framework for data sharing as this becomes more adopted. But for now, I think the advice that we give to companies that are thinking about this is look at the existing regulation and try to be compliant with them. And privacy is probably at the top of concerns right now because of all the things that happened in the past few years.
And Mike, maybe how do you look at it while you're building Ocean protocol? How do you look at the regulatory aspect and data privacy that is becoming a bigger deal almost every week?
Well, it's a huge topic. I mean, I think in general, regulation needs to evolve. I think it's way behind the tech at the moment, and there's a lot of things about decentralized technology which regulators, I think, have still got to catch up on, and there's a lot of thinking that still needs to be done on what kind of regulation encourages the right kind of growth in the decentralized space. I think it'll come, but I think it's a long way behind. On the privacy issue specifically, I think this is a very interesting topic, particularly for the healthcare kind of examples where it's extremely sensitive. So my take on this is that there are actually a lot of scenarios where you can actually come up with some creative solutions to privacy. And one example of these is for the healthcare space, for example. You don't necessarily want to move the patient data to somewhere else where there's a high risk of it being leaked. You want to keep it within some kind of secure domain. So there's a lot of creative solutions like sending the algorithm to the data and training your AI model on the data without actually moving the data and then just taking the algorithm out after it's been trained. So you can still get the value in terms of training the model, but you never put the confidentiality of the data itself at risk. Now, there's quite a lot of complexities around that, yeah, and like there's, in fact, some interesting research on can you actually look at the model and figure out some things about the data that was used to train it? So there's some interesting things like that you need to think about. But in theory, this is actually a very powerful solution for a lot of these sort of privacy concerns. And you can theoretically imagine a world where you're doing federated learning. So you might have 10,000 different hospitals, each with a patient database. The model gets sent to each one of those to get trained, and then you bring back those models together to create a single aggregate model that contains all the intelligence gained from all of those individual different locations. At no point was that patient data ever moved out of its secure storage. And at no point did we ever have to join all the data together in order to do a big machine learning training exercise. And I think these kind of creative solutions are going to be increasingly important, particularly to respect regulatory requirements, but also to respect confidentiality, and people's data needs to be protected. So I think this kind of thing is going to be driving a lot of the thinking for sort of future systems designs.
And while we talk about the future, like what you just described right now, and is it happening already? I mean, are we capable of doing it, or is it just a conceptual idea of like sending the algorithm, or can we do it already?
We can do it. I mean, what I'd say is there's been a lot of proof of concepts in this area. So federated learning is possible. There are ways of doing federated learning. There's people doing federated learning on mobile phones, for example, so that it can learn from people's actions on a mobile phone. We've been doing it at Ocean. We've been doing that. We have a protocol, part of the protocol, whereby you can send an operation to the data to execute the operation remotely, and then get the result back without actually seeing the data. So our protocol is designed to support this kind of use case. And we have some use cases where we're doing data sharing of this sort in practice. Like we have a collaboration between the National Neuroscience Institute in Singapore and some health partners in Munich, and they're doing data sharing successfully using this kind of technology and approach. So yeah, it's definitely happening. I think it's still early days, but it's certainly possible. It's definitely happening, and it's an exciting space to be involved in.
Great, thank you. I'll stay with you, Mike. I have one more question for you. Sorry. So I think we're all quite clear on what Ocean Protocol can do in terms of like making it easy to share data. What is happening now with like Ocean Protocol? Because we understand what it does, but like, is there any company actually using it? Are we at the proof of concept stage? And where do you see it going in like 6 months, in 1 year, or in 5 years? And Dr. Stefan, are you actually working with it on that at this stage, and are you getting benefits out of it? Like what benefits did you see of using it?
Okay, so I should probably give a little bit of context. Ocean Protocol is not a company in the traditional sense. It's a non-profit foundation. Yeah? So everything we are doing, all the software we produce, is going to be open source. So anyone can take it and use it. Yeah, we're not trying to create a centralized monolith like many other companies. We're giving this stuff away for free. And the part of the reason we can do that is because we're funded by token sales to be able to support the development effort. Where it is now, to address the question, we've just launched our beta network, so you can go and try it out live. Obviously, caveat emptor, it's a beta network. There's no doubt a few bugs to be found, so maybe don't go risking real money quite yet, but it works, and it's up there, and you can use it. And over the next few months, we'll be releasing more software. We'll be getting more of the standards agreed and defined, and we'll be helping people to actually prototype and build using it. We're already using it in a number of test cases, some of the use cases with partners we're working with, people like National Neuroscience Institute in Singapore on the health side, with Roche Diagnostics. We're part of the mobility blockchain initiative, which is a big association of car manufacturers looking to share machine learning data for self-driving cars. So we're involved in a lot of POC and development work with quite a few different partners at the moment. I'd say it's still in beta, the network, but it's looking quite promising so far.
Great. And so, Dr. Stefan, like, have you started to use working on some of these POCs, or is it?
Not yet. No. We're not a user in that sense, but we actually are working on a research collaboration with Ocean, because, as I said, one of our missions is to provide advanced tools and platforms to the community that enable better AI approaches in the end, right? And so we're very interested in what Ocean Protocol and others in this space are doing, and so we hope to fund through Ocean Protocol some PhD scholarships that will actually look at research aspects of the technology and how we can also use these new aspects of data sharing to improve the tools and the usability for everybody, to make the systems more performant, more secure, and ultimately better understood. I think there's still a lot of uncertainty or question marks in the community. How does this work? How does it all fit in? How different is it from traditional ways of doing machine learning? So it's not so well understood at the moment, and I think there's a lot of research questions to be answered, and we certainly want to help with that and be part of that as well. So that's why we're looking at this particular aspect of data sharing also.
Great. So we're looking forward to the result then. Andreas, maybe for you, like when you hear about all of these like concepts that are fairly technical, how do you articulate discussion with the business side on your customer who are like not really techy, but somehow needs to be supported by the technology for their use case?
I think when we speak to businesses around or about the value of data sharing, we usually try to emphasize three things. One is it can help you to develop new business models through data that you may not even be aware of yet. You may have data. In fact, many companies have a lot of data, but you don't do anything with it. You don't use it productively. So that's one thing, new business models. The other thing is regulatory compliance, risk management, just the fact that it is so difficult to deal with large data sets in a highly regulated environment with concerns around privacy and provenance and intellectual property. So a product like Ocean or a distributed ledger may help you with that, because it gives you a lot of the capabilities like provenance, like a transparent ledger, immutability of the records for free. And then the third aspect that we try to emphasize is reduction of cost, efficiency. Data management, data strategy, dealing with large data sets is hugely expensive, and especially if you look at all the legacy infrastructure that is still there. So something like Ocean or something comparable that creates sort of an intermediate layer on top of that may help you to just at some point automate your data management in a better way than how we do it today. So I think that's kind of the messages that we try to convey not from a technical angle, but more from a business angle.
Great. So now we've worked with the business, we kind of know what we want to do, what are our use case, and we need to start to get our hands dirty. So I'm a company, I know I have some data somewhere, it's not accessible today. What advice would you start, what step would you give me, what are the first steps that I need to start doing if we've agreed that there is, we won't develop this new AI because it's going to develop something for us. What are the first steps that I need to start doing as a company? Maybe Stephen?
Okay. I think the most important thing is to start with the use case, right? So it doesn't really help you if you have data and you don't know what to do with it, right? So you need to have a purpose, and you need to have a clear objective, what you want to achieve, right? So it could be improving a business process or optimizing something in your whatever it may be, right? So this is where we start, right? Is there a use case? Is there a business model for using that data in a meaningful way in the company? That's when we start collaborations is also a question we ask, right? And I think ultimately, data, AI, machine learning, these are all very powerful tools, but it's wrong to start with the technology and the tools. You need to start with the business case and the use case and the domain and see how you can meaningfully apply all these tools in the right way.
Okay, and let's say I have my use case. I know what I want to do, but I realize I don't have enough data, and I plan to use Ocean Protocol when it's public. What do I need to do to be ready to run Ocean Protocol?
I actually think talent is a big thing here. So getting the right people on the team, looking at the use case, the right mix of skills, either whether they're in-house or external, I think it's absolutely critical, because executing on these data projects can be an expensive nightmare, or it can be a quick win success. And often the experience and the skills of your team is in fact what's going to make the difference there. Yeah, you can spend a lot of time going down blind alleys if you don't know what what you're doing, and at the same time, some of these things can be done in a few weeks if you've got the right tools, the right data, and the right skills to run your AI algorithms. So I think companies that want to be ready for this should really be thinking about, how do I build my data capability, my AI capability in my organization, or how am I going to access that if it's through partners or other organizations? And I think that's critical. And at the same time, you still, doesn't matter what technology you've got, you're going to have to unlock the governance aspects. Yeah? How are you going to get the rights to use the data? How are you going to make sure that all the regulatory and sort of risk aspects are addressed in this? Technology doesn't particularly help you with that. Yeah? So this kind of preparation, I think, is critical. So I mean, I think I'm with Andreas on this one. You actually do need a data strategy, which is looking at what is the economic value or the social value you're trying to create from AI, and then look at the enablers that are going to help you to get there. There's people, there's technology stuff like Ocean, there's the kind of arrangements and partnerships you're maybe going to want to form to be able to get access to the data. There's a host of different things that you need to probably start getting in place, and I would call that data strategy. Yeah.
And so you mentioned a very interesting point, which is getting the right people and people with the right skill set as well. How is Singapore from that perspective? I don't know who want to take the question.
Anyone want a job, by the way? I mean, finding good people is always one of the most important things to do in any business, and I think it's especially true in this space because it's a new field and there's a lot of quite rare skills required. And I think in this space, what's very interesting is there are a lot of very specialized skills that need to come together to make a successful project, and it's actually quite hard to find any individuals who cover off all of these bases, or even a majority of them. And I'll give you an example, like data cleaning. Absolutely critical if you're going to be able to run AI projects successfully. If you don't get your data clean, your model's probably going to come up with garbage results, and you may not even realize it because you haven't got clean data to test it against. Yeah, this kind of thing is a big issue, and it requires a very specific skills and a very specific mindset to really get into the data quality aspects, the data cleaning aspects. Some people are great at this. Yeah, other people are much better at the theoretical model, and they'll gloss over these messy things like missing data and mismatched field sizes and this kind of thing. So this kind of stuff is absolutely critical in order to build a team that can succeed.
So I don't know if we have any students in the room, or someone who want to do a career shift. But if you were to give an advice, if I want to start working in the blockchain for AI or working in purely AI, what would you recommend me to do? Do I go do a MOOCC online? Do I start coding by myself? Where should I start?
I think a really good piece of advice, actually, and I'm personally very passionate about it, is get involved in open source. Yeah, open source software is a great way to learn technology, but also give back to the community and get yourself a bit of a reputation and make good contacts and make good friends. I've had some of the most fun in my life going to open source conferences and participating in the community, building things together. So I think it's great advice for any student.
Well, maybe that's the time to advertise our training program. I mean, it really all depends on your background, right? What skills you already have, what expertise you have, and where you would like to go next, right? And I think, yes, open source is a great, not only a great field to start, but also a great resource, I think. There's a lot of resources available online these days that help you get started on different technologies, both in terms of training material, as well as just the documentation that's out there, that's been provided by the community. But we also offer all kinds of training programs for different target groups. From short workshops to just understand what AI is about, to more intensive programs that go over a few months or up to a year, to really become specialized in a certain area, and also get some of the practical training that is really necessary in this space.
Yeah, because I can speak for my company. We struggle as well to find good talents. I think we're almost at the end. I'd like to open for questions from the audience. Do we have anyone with a question for the panelist?
What's the minimum academic training? Is it academic or is it more practical and you just have the ability to code? Like, take cleaning data. Can you use other softwares to do that, or you have to create something from scratch?
So the academic question is interesting. I never got any academic qualification in computer science at all, or programming. I was self-taught programming. So I'm probably not a particularly representative example, but I taught myself computer science, effectively. I don't think there's any qualification where you say you must have this qualification or this qualification. Obviously, you have to have learned the basics, the fundamentals of the field, the skills. But I think anyone with an inquisitive mind can learn and can master these skills. I do think there was a slight personality thing to this. Like, some people are much better at the fine detail stuff. Other people are much better at the hardcore math. So, for example, if you're doing more of the AI stuff and you've got to understand gradient descent algorithms, you kind of need a relatively strong mathematical background to be able to prove whether your thing has converged or not. Yeah. So this kind of skill is more heavy on the sort of theoretical mathematical side, but a lot of it's common sense. Yeah, and being able to really just be diligent about looking at what the problem you're trying to solve is and what the constraints are. Data cleaning is a great example. Yeah, it's actually really, really hard to automate because you actually need to understand what the data means. Yeah, like, what does a 0 mean in this data set? Yeah, it could mean it's actually 0, or it could have been the code that someone entered for I don't know because the software that they used didn't have any other way of entering it. Yeah, this kind of thing requires common sense. It requires understanding the data. It requires understanding the context in which the data was gathered. That's not deep theoretical skills, but it's common sense, and it's really looking at the data, understanding it, and being diligent in evaluating it. So I think there's a whole host of different backgrounds of people who can really contribute in this space. And of course, it's not all about just the data and the AI algorithms. I mean, someone's actually got to figure out how to make people change in an organization if you're going to get the value out of the AGI. How do you organize people? How do you motivate people to make use of the data or the AI capability that you've just installed? Yeah, there's organizational aspects and skills required as well. So I honestly think anyone can get involved in this space. Just different aptitudes, different backgrounds, all needed.
Yeah, just to add on this one, we have a few data engineers that have accounting, academics training, and they just decided to do a career change, and they started learning by themselves we took them as intern, and then they grew, and today she's one of the best data engineer in the company. So really, like, don't be afraid and go for it, I would say.
Thank you. We've talked about how to enable like a global data sharing economy, either through technology or protocol. But Andreas, you also mentioned that it would be useful to have kind of a global regulatory framework. I was wondering if you thought a little bit about what would that ideally look like.
Actually, I think the man sitting behind you has an answer to that question, as it happens.
My name's Henry, and I am a lawyer. I work with Andreas at PwC, and know Mike as well from the Ocean project. So I think it's a very complex question. I think finding the parameters for facilitating the sharing of data across borders without impinging on the privacy aspects is obviously a significant challenge. Mike's touched on a couple of ways that can happen. There are recognized methods, for example, around aggregation of data. For example, the idea of moving algorithms to the data in order to train those algorithms. They're not without their challenges, and I think we've seen it throughout technology. The introduction of the internet, the introduction of the blockchain as well, that the government struggle to keep up with it. I think the problem we're seeing at the moment is, if you look, for example, at the latest round of cyber legislation that's come in, looking at Vietnam, Thailand, China, within recent years, we've got a very strong protectionist tendency that's come in. At the moment, we're sort of fighting against that tide a little bit, so people are looking to build ring-fenced data in an even sort of more compelling way. So the problem that Mike alluded to around pools of data, there are problems within companies, there are problems within teams within companies, there are problems within nations actually ring-fencing this data. So a lot of it is really about education and explaining to people that it's not unsafe to allow that data to be transported out of a country. Once you've done that, then I think there's an opportunity to then sort of build the practices and the test cases, the use cases, to demonstrate that that is the case. And from there, you can start to develop more, I guess, robust data sharing friendly parameters. I'm afraid I don't think it's a very positive response to your question, because we're seeing, particularly recently, as I say, that those things are going the wrong way. I think people see GDPR, for example, as a useful sort of benchmark for all of this. But it's caused panic, it's caused sort of overreaction to it. People have done way too much to compensate for what's actually needed on that, and I think we've seen too much of the sort of constitutional privacy aspects driving this, as opposed to the commercial realities and requirements over the future. So thanks for the pass there, Andreas. And I can speak at length about this one, but I think it's a real challenge, and I think when governments start to understand that if they can open up the liquidity of the data across borders, see the good use cases, and then have the regulation to support it, that's better. My concern at the moment is here in this part of the world, as I said, China, Vietnam, Thailand, it's all going the other direction. So we've all got to hope we can get some more enlightened approaches coming through soon. How's that?
Thank you, Henry.
Maybe I can make just a thought on this. Maybe. I think that there will be, and it may be 5 to 10 years out, to be fair, there may be a sudden switch from this protectionist thinking to a competitive environment, because these data supply lines that we envisage, ultimately they're virtual, yeah? They're going to be able to relocate to different countries very, very quickly, possibly in an automated way, and possibly based on, market pressures, currency exchange rates. In fact, if the currency exchange rate moves more than this, I'm going to move this part of my data supply line automatically from the US to Canada. or something like that. Yeah, these kind of things will start to happen because they're completely virtualized, these data supply lines. And as you've got decentralized technology supporting them, it's actually going to be very hard to stop it. Yeah, because decentralized technology is largely indestructible and censorship resistant. And it's designed to survive nuclear strikes and government attacks. So what you'll probably find is that competitive pressures start to change regulatory mindsets in the sort of medium term, like 10 years, and it'll start to become a source of competitive advantage. Do we have the best service providers for data supply lines in our country, yes or no? And that's going to be what drives some of the change.
And that's related to the question of valuation data.
Yeah. Yeah.
Marketplaces who can put it without being to value.
One last question. Yeah.
Can you share some concrete examples of technology being used in PwC, maybe AI and blockchain, or maybe even a combination of both of them? So, because as you mentioned already that it's an audit firm, so what you are trying to achieve and what are the use cases that you're trying to achieve?
Actually, personally, I'm much more interested in the other way around. So looking at technology, especially AI and blockchain, and thinking about what are the risks that you have to be aware of as a company. What kind of risk assessment can you do? And then how can we help you with assurance type services? So building a risk management framework, building protections, building this sort of almost like an audit framework, but I think we're not quite there yet. So I think that's where we are moving towards. We're also using AI and blockchain in some aspects, but I think for us, being an audit firm, first and foremost, but also an advisory firm, the question of what's the risk is actually much more important and much more interesting.
When you say risk, it's just from the legal perspective or as well from the ethical perspective?
It's both. In fact, you could draw an analogy. I mean, I work a lot in financial services, and during the financial crisis, a bit more than 10 years ago, you came across these quant models that just gave the wrong results. So there were hidden risks in these models that gave wrong prices of these very complex credit derivatives. And when you look at AI right now, I think it's in a similar state. AI probably has hidden risks related to the black box nature, to the non-explainability of the algorithms. So what we need to do, what every company needs to do, is really try to peer into the black box and understand what is going on. So that's what I mean by risks. Not really knowing what's happening and just relying blindly on technology. And I think that's probably a recipe for disaster at some point. Yes, yes. As AI becomes more and more adopted, as data sets become bigger, it's bound to happen again. There are going to be other privacy violations, other scandals. So I think we as data subjects, all of us, need to stand up and try to become aware of what's happening and also try to find solutions to make this a bit more stable and a bit more predictive.
So, going back to the regulation issue, because of the business you mentioning, I think we can all agree that we need to have better guidelines and regulation in place. Now, we can see government taking some baby steps. I suppose, but what role do you think companies and staff have in contributing to this?
Actually, Singapore has been very good in issuing guidelines. So the MAS came out with the feed principles in November last year. The PDPC, the Personal Data Protection Commission, came out with the Model AI Governance Framework about 2 months ago. So I encourage all of you to read these documents. They are relatively easy to understand. They're non-technical, and they give really good guidelines on AI and how to use AI responsibly as a company. So I think that's where it starts, with guidelines, trying to lead firms into the right direction. But I have absolutely no doubt that in the not too far future, there are going to be regulatory additions to these guidelines. But understanding the guidelines is the first step, in my opinion, for a company to know where the regulation is going. I think you're right, but if you look at the feed principles by the MAS are not just about AI, they're also about data analytics. In fact, they coined this very nice acronym, AIDA, AI and Data Analytics. And they talk about model governance, yes, as one big part of a future regulatory framework, but also talk a lot about data governance, because it's not just about the model as such. A lot of the bias, for example, happens not because of the model, but because of biased input data or training data. So we always need to look not just at the model, but also at the data sets. The PDPC is probably a bit narrower in this respect, I agree. So I would say that the MAS, the feed principles are going more into the direction that you're outlining.
I think we're running out of time. Just before we close this session, if you would have to have 1 minute to communicate a key message that you would like the audience to remember from this session, maybe starting with you, Mike.
Well, I think I would encourage people to think big about what might be possible in the future. I do think that this. There will be an increasingly decentralized world. It won't be all about big organizations doing stuff internally with their own data, which guys like Google and Facebook can do, but that's not the majority of the economy. That's not where the majority of the innovation and the change is going to really happen. We have to make sure that everyone has that power. And I think the concept of decentralized data supply lines, of having these flows of data and flows of algorithms between different participants, is what's going to really make the difference in this space in the medium term. And think about what's possible. I mean, we've had a bunch of ideas about what you might be able to do with this, but I'm sure there's some people are going to have some much better ideas than we have about what you can do with this kind of approach. So think big, think about the possibilities, and get involved in the space if it's your thing.
All right. I'm really excited about what we talked about today, because I think it's a sign of the maturing of the area of the sector of AI, that we start to think about not only the algorithms, the machine learning methods that get a lot of the press these days, but also about the tools that we need to build around them to support these algorithms. And better access to data, better ways of sharing data, ways of overcoming data privacy limitations in interesting new ways. I think those are all relevant and important tools. We talked about data cleaning, data quality, right? Automating some of these processes, it will be just as important. And I'm encouraged to see this happening not only in research, but also companies coming into the space, startups coming into the space, and providing solutions, providing services in these areas. So I find it really exciting, and we also want to support those activities and those areas as much as we can.
If there's one thing that I would like to re-emphasize tonight, then it's that data sharing is not about building even bigger data sets, about you giving me your data and I give you my data, and then we build a big data set somewhere in a centralized location. In fact, it can be done differently, and the paradigm that we are talking about here is data stays where it is, in a secure, local, personalized data store somewhere close to the actual data owner, to the data subjects, and the algorithms go to the data. That's how it has to work, I think. The way to get there will be long. I think it will take a few years, especially because the current, these current structures that we see around big tech companies owning a lot of data and monetizing them with or without your consent as a data subject is probably not sustainable, but it will take some a few years. It will take new regulation. It will take a few more scandals, probably, to make people aware and then build better solutions for data sharing.
Great. Thank you very much for being here tonight. And thanks for SGInnovate and Ocean Protocol for organizing this event. And thanks all of you for attending tonight. Thank you.